Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you happen to be. We're at the home stretch. We're working through the last content in the entire class, and that's what this video is about. I'm going to move you further toward your capstone project, and I want to build on the information that I started on last week. Make sure and go back and review last week's video on how to pick sources, how to do research through the library databases. Make sure that you review the content on how to go about finding a scholarly peer-reviewed source, because that's going to be an essential part of your forthcoming assignments in the 4th module and the 5th module. To come back to the course and take a quick look, the assignments inside the 4th module, again, tied directly to the assignments due inside the 5th module. Here is the embedded librarian information. This contains really good information on how to go about doing research in the databases. You are not required to do this, but it is a helpful bonus thing if you want to do it. It will show up on my feed. I can give you some feedback on it if you do the assignments that are embedded in there. For purposes of this video, I'm going to actually avoid talking about that because I would rather spend my time here. I try to keep these videos under 15 minutes talking about Module 4 and Module 5. There are two main things then that I want to do inside this video. One of them is to address some of the things that you're going to be facing inside this template. As you come into the template, you can see that there are a lot of different questions here. What is your position? Name two terms that you would have to define. So, it's asking questions about things like the rhetorical modes. It's asking things about the argument itself. And again, I wanted to be able to address those things. Make sure that you use the information in your thesis. Make sure that you can formulate an opposing thesis. That's going to be an important part of it. If you cannot figure out what an opposing thesis would be, it should also be an argument. You do not have an argument yourself. It's a really good way to go about checking to make sure that you do indeed have an argument. It also gives you a better appreciation for your own argument. How can you fully understand your position if you don't fully understand the opposite position as well? By the way, that doesn't mean that you have to agree with the opposite position. It just means that you need to understand the types of arguments that the opposite position is making so that you can better articulate your own position and defend your own position. I have had students before in the past who began to investigate the opposite position and quickly realized that there was more support for the opposite position, and they were forced to be intellectually honest and change their position. It does happen. That's part of learning and growing. It's happened to me as well. I won't say what topics. I try very hard not to say what topics. What I think about certain things, because I don't want you guys to feel like you have to write what I think. I want you to write what you think, and I want you to defend what you think. That's what matters to me. I don't care if I agree or disagree. I want to see that you have a position you can establish, you can articulate that position, that you understand the opposite position, and that you can defend the original position with evidence, and that you can address the evidence that the opposition uses as well. On that note, let's look at some slides here. Let me get out of the way here again. Okay, I'm going to do this on fast forward because, again, we have a limited amount of time, and I try to keep these videos short, but I do want to make sure that I can talk through. So this is just some general advice to kind of get us started. Again, make sure you have good ways to back up your argument. Make sure you know your topic. That involves doing research and reading about it. You can't just say, I've always been told this thing. There are two primary sexes in all the animal kingdom. Yes, but if you actually do some research on it, it's a lot more complicated than that. So make sure that you know your topic. This is just one example. And I, by the way, I use that example because one of the weird things is there are creatures out there who can change their sex. And I'm talking about fish and snakes and things like that. So, if you just say, well, I've always been told this my whole life. Okay, yes, but go do some research and you might discover most things are far more complicated than you would think. So decide what your purpose is and stick to it. You don't have to, again, explain everything. These are fairly short essays in this class. Decide one topic and stick to that topic. Be confident. You don't have to hedge in this. In day-to-day life, we might say something like, it would be great if you could pass the SALT. But, because we distinguish that from something like, give me the SALT. They both mean the exact same thing, but one of them tries to do it politely and the other one is very brusque. And so we tend to avoid being brusque, but in an essay like this, you need to be simple and direct. There's a way to not be a jerk when you're saying these things and to express confidence without necessarily hedging. So you do want to write something like, climate change is true in light of these facts, right? That's good and that's confident. I mentioned before as well, try to, because of the nature of this class, use objective thought in order to prove things. Stay away from beliefs. Like I've told you before, beliefs are terrific. They give our lives meaning and value. Some of the beliefs I have, ghosts and aliens and things like that. I could talk about those things, but I know that I can't write about them because I can't demonstrate them to other people. So, you have to stay away from that. You have to differentiate those things. Again, I'm not telling you not to have beliefs. I am telling you, though, be careful about where you draw the line and demarcate for purposes of this essay. Okay. In a typical class, we would spend a bit more time on this, but I'm gonna skip past this. Just know, pause here, read this, and then we'll switch over to the next one. There are three main ways to make an appeal to your audience. Logos is logic, pathos is the emotional side, and ethos is something like roughly speaking, the authority of a particular argument. So logos is going to be, if you quit smoking now, you stand a 25% chance of not developing lung cancer. Pathos, if you quit smoking now, you'll probably live longer, which makes your kids happy. That's an appeal to emotion. Ethos, the Surgeon General, the leading doctor in the entire United States, says that you should quit smoking. So that's an appeal to a kind of authority. Think about what kind of appeals you're making, and think about, especially with that third one, who are the authorities? Who are the qualified authorities? Think about their background. Think about what they bring to the conversation. Pathos, I would say avoid this one as much as possible, because manipulating or changing people's emotions in order to get them to agree to do something, that's not a great tactic. What is the purpose then of writing all this stuff in a college level environment? Well, I always use the example of the Higgs boson particle. Peter Higgs, prior to the confirmation of the Higgs boson particle, if you were taking his class and you wanted to argue that the Higgs boson particle did not exist, well, that's bold of you because you're arguing it to the man's face. But he should also be able to give you a good grade, because if you argue that it does not exist and you can fully support that, he, even if he doesn't agree with it, must be able to give you a good grade. That's kind of how this works. That's what you're doing in an academic environment. You're not trying to guess what I think and then trying to prove that back to me. You're trying to say, again, what I said just a minute ago, establish a position and defend that position. Okay, as part of this, a couple quick things as well. These are things you probably have heard your entire lives. Going back here, make sure that you don't have a fact. You cannot argue a fact. You have got to have an opinion. You must have an opinion. That's one of the things that I hear every semester students get confused on. Well, how am I supposed to argue this? I can't have an opinion. Yes, you can, and you should, but it should be an opinion based on facts. Again, going back to, if I want to say that aliens exist, there are no facts about that. This would just be me saying, the universe is a really big place. It seems like there would be aliens, but that's not a fact. That's just, kind of a guess, an intuition. But if I say Frank wrecked the car, that's a fact. But then I could say Frank is a bad driver because he wrecked the car. Now that is an opinion based on fact. Maybe Frank is a bad driver. That's his third wreck, today or something. But maybe Frank is a great driver and he just happened to have one accident out of 30 years of driving. So that is an opinion based on a fact. We can argue about that. Down here at the bottom, all of these are facts. All three of these are facts. You cannot argue these, but you can argue about them. The Earth has higher temperatures in the last decade than the last 100 years. That's a fact. It is just a fact. What causes that? Is it human-made? Is it just natural climate change? What does it happen to be? That's how we can go about arguing about this. Abortions happen every day. That's a fact, but we can argue about that. We should prevent abortions from happening every single day because XYZ. Again, take the fact, argue about that fact. And I give these examples because, like I've said before, this is not a class about arguing about puppies and kittens. We argue about things that exist in real life. So I've already talked about this. I've given a couple of examples. I always give the one at the bottom, by the way, because I have been told in some classes evolution is a matter of belief. It is not. It is a matter of pointing to objective information in the world around you. If we dig down X feet into the soil, there's evidence there. If we look at the genetic code, that is evidence. Again, this is objective type of information that we can look at. So make sure to differentiate that and be careful about the use of the word theory. That's kind of a complicated thing. I'm going to put it to the side. All right, last thing, make sure that your idea is open to debate. And this is what I, inside the module, call a sane, rational person. Make sure that a sane, rational person would disagree with you. That doesn't mean that it's somebody that you have to agree with. It is somebody, though, that has a logical reason for the way that they think. So child molesters are bad. The only people who would argue otherwise would be child molesters, and they are not sane, rational people because they hurt children who have no agency whatsoever. America should not simply surrender to terrorism. The opposite of that. America should simply surrender to terrorism. Only the terrorists are going to think this, and they are insane, irrational people because they drive airplanes into buildings. Not a good thing. All right, the rest of this, just one last thing it's worth mentioning as well. Decide or realize which rhetorical mode guides your argument. Every single argument is based on a rhetorical mode of some sort. And it has that one, possibly two rhetorical modes that guide it. So, for example, abortion is, in essence, an argument over definition. What is the definition of life? What is the definition of women's rights? And how do those two things compete with one another? Those definitions guide that. Evolution is an argument based over cause. What are the causes of the things that we see around us? Healthcare is an argument over the effect. If we pass universal healthcare, what is the effect on our entire country? I'm going to skip past the rest of this because the rest of it covers stuff that is covered inside the module. I will note, make sure again you use counter arguments and that you recognize them, because I really, in this slide, in this video, on the left, that is one possible organization for your essay. On the right is a different one. The one on the left emphasizes you attacking a popular position. The popular position would be the antithesis that you introduce in the second section of the paper. By the way, each one of these bullet points is not a separate paragraph. It is an idea of organization inside the overall paper. So yes, it might be a single paragraph, but it might be 3 or 4 paragraphs. If it's your dissertation, it could be an entire chapter of a book. So that the left, again, is one organization. The right is a different organization. This is a more traditional style essay there on the right. Okay, that gives me just a couple minutes here. I am going to go through this one even faster. Trusted versus non-trusted resources. I at least want to briefly mention this. There are a series of questions that you can ask of any particular source to see if it's trustworthy. Question number 1, and by the way, this is covered inside the module too, but question number 1, what is the background of the author? Does the author have any right to be able to talk about this particular topic? So Bill Clinton, for example, could not and should not write a book on relationships. He's not very well qualified for that. Again, I'm gonna kind of skim through this. Question number 2, what is the purpose of the material? The Onion, for example, is not very evident. It is an American satirical organization, but it presents its information as though it is a legitimate news source, and it infuriates people who are not in on that joke. So the purpose of material is not always evident. When was the material written? That matters. If we're looking at a farmer's guide to Berlin and it was written in 1980, that is a very different thing than one written in 2022, because 1980 was prior to the fall of the Berlin Wall. We need to be careful about when information was written. Question number 4 and 5, what is the reputation of the publisher and what does the publisher have to lose if they are wrong? So consider, for example, an article written about putting sugar in the gas tank of a car to improve its gas mileage. As a quick example, if that article appeared in Time magazine, people would take it seriously, but not very many people, because they would say, well, Time magazine doesn't really have anything to do with cars. And then Time magazine might buy a lot of cars for people who did this. Weekly World News, absolutely not. They have covers like that. But Car and Driver, people would stop subscribing to Car and Driver because they would say, wow, they were so wrong about this. How in the world can we continue to subscribe to a publication that does things like this? Question number 6, does the author submit or press anything or suppress any information? So oftentimes with ancient aliens, for example, we hear people say, like, look at this ancient astronaut figure. Okay, well, the next question should be, where is that? In what museum does that appear? And they don't tell you, right? Same thing. Here's a picture of a face on Mars. The only thing that they don't tell you is that there's some phenomenon called pareidolia, which makes you tend to see faces and things around you. It's just a natural thing. You can see a face in your water faucet if you look at it. Okay, last 2, does the author have a point, or are they just manipulating your emotions? This I've already covered a little while ago in the video. If they're just riling you up, pause and think, okay, what is the logical argument here? And then last, who is the intended audience? That can oftentimes help you with the other questions that I just covered a second ago, so be careful about that one. Did that very quickly, but that's because, again, I try to keep these under 15 minutes. I will see you next week, and we'll pick it up from there.